I'm Nate Behrens, and this is Ludodrum. Jumping. In many ways, it is the root game mechanic, the seed of gaming's family tree, the common ancestor for countless games and a multitude of genres. Over the course of 3 decades, platformers have branched out into myriad paths, rich and varied permutations of the same basic concept. Jumping on things feels good. One of the early pioneers and stalwarts of the genre was Jordan Mechner's Prince of Persia, which featured innovative controls, rotoscoped animation, and an injection of puzzle solving. The series was rebooted in the early 2000s with The Sands of Time, a game that created a framework for 3D platforming that dominated the genre for years and is still visible today in games like Uncharted and Tomb Raider. There's plenty to talk about there, but right now I want to talk about a different reboot, the all but forgotten 2008 title, Prince of Persia. In 2008, after rapidly pushing out 2 sequels to The Sands of Time, Ubisoft announced a fresh start for the series, one that would retain the pillars of the franchise: Arabian and Persian-inspired fantasy, sword fighting, and acrobatic parkour-style platforming, but otherwise had no connection to the previous games. A new prince who wasn't actually a prince, a new open world, a new visual style, and a new take on the Sands of Time trilogy's tried and true platforming mechanics. The game underperformed on release and was essentially forgotten by both the gaming public and Ubisoft, who quickly moved on to their new cash cow, Assassin's Creed. But it deserved better. The 2008 Prince of Persia is a flawed gem, with a great story, gorgeous visuals, and some seriously satisfying platforming. What makes that platforming feel so good? Well, in a word, fluidity. Consider the pacing here and here. This is me playing Sands of Time for the first time in about a decade. Yes, I cherry-picked this clip, but it demonstrates my point. I have to stop every few moments to parse the environment and figure out where to go next. In the Sands of Time, many platforming sections are something of a puzzle, and the flow reflects this. Jump to a ledge, then pause and determine the next step, then execute. This isn't a criticism. Sands of Time is a classic, and this pacing is an essential part of its success. In the 2008 Prince of Persia, though, motions flow smoothly into one another, strung together in long, unbroken chains. The game mostly dispenses with the puzzle element of navigation, placing the end destination clearly in sight at almost all times, laying out obstacles in clear lanes, and even dedicating one of the face buttons to bringing up a guide if you ever get lost. Areas that can be climbed on are clearly marked, with scratches pointing out wall-run spots, vines indicating climbable areas, and visual consistency for pillars, hooks, poles, and other interactive elements. The Sands of Time games filled their environments with red herrings and decorative elements that looked interactive but weren't part of the critical path. In the 2008 game, these elements are almost always placed along a path that leads somewhere, often in a straight line. This removes some of the fun of having to plot out a path, but it allows the player to keep up momentum. It's almost always very clear where to go next, so you're rarely stopping to figure out your route. To keep the flow going, timing is very forgiving, with long input windows for the next move in the chain, a full second or more in many cases, and the game is forgiving of mistimed presses or incorrect inputs. Even death is a minor obstacle. If you fall, your partner Elika will come to your rescue and move you back to the last flat surface you were on. No loading screen, no fade to black, just get back to it. All of these elements were criticized in some circles as making the game too easy, and I won't lie, it is, but the choices allow for almost constant forward momentum. Nearly every part of the game reflects this priority: fluid, continuous motion. The world is open, with each node connected to several others. It's possible to move from one end of the world to the other without stopping or hitting a load screen, and even areas that are gated until later in the game have paths around them to prevent them from becoming dead ends. Combat was designed around this constant flow as well. Each face button is tied to a different type of attack, and the game has accounted for nearly every possible sequence of attacks with a unique, unbroken combo. The art style, too, isn't there just to look pretty. It reinforces the fluidity by literally mimicking the look of watercolor paintings and filling the game with wispy trails, smooth animations, and colors that subtly bleed into their surroundings. The game's design philosophy is perhaps best encapsulated in one small but critical change to a familiar mechanic. In the Sands of Time games, jumping to a pillar looks like this. In the reboot, it works a little differently. In Sands of Time, when landing on a pillar, the prince grabs on, and the player has to rotate around to the direction they would like to go next. There's a pause and moment of deliberation as you determine the next step and move into position. In the 2008 game, the prince immediately swings around the pillar into position to continue forward. For the rare moments when a change of direction is needed, you can still stop and rotate, but in the vast majority of cases, a row of pillars can be traversed with only the jump button pressed in a predictable rhythm. No pause, no deliberation, just forward momentum. All of this comes together to provide an experience of unique flow, a relaxing, almost trance-like state of simple but satisfying traversal that few games have achieved. Certainly, Prince of Persia has its flaws. It's repetitive to a fault, and the occasional attempt to mix things up by adding new obstacles or puzzles are generally pretty shallow. This makes it all the more tragic to me that the game was roundly rejected by audiences. A proper sequel might have addressed the game's weaknesses and iterated on its strengths, but the lukewarm reception led Ubisoft to abandon the direction altogether and instead produce an uninspired sequel to the Sands of Time trilogy as a follow-up. The Forgotten Sands is okay, but it was a sequel no one wanted and a step backward for the series. Few games before or since have achieved a similar fluidity in this style of platforming as Prince of Persia. In recent years, Mirror's Edge has provided a fantastic alternative that is far more technically challenging and realistic, while Assassin's Creed essentially took over the world for several years with nearly automatic one-button traversal that was certainly fluid but far less satisfying. So as it stands, the 2008 Prince of Persia reboot remains a unique and isolated curiosity, a bold experiment that deserved more than it got.